Welcome, everybody. This is the Sustainability Committee for the Connecticut section of AWWA. Just to give you a little bit of background, the Connecticut section, this committee kind of morphed from the Conservation Committee back when Marian was chairman back in 1990-something.
89 to 90.
89 to 90. And in fact, I took over when Marian left chair of the Conservation Committee. I took over. And I'm still here.
You get a medal.
Yeah, okay. And anyway, the Conservation Committee, I think back about 10 years ago, more from the Conservation Committee / Web Committee, okay, for the section. And now we have kind of reinvigorated or kind of reinvented ourselves, and now we're becoming the Sustainability Committee. And primarily, the prime function that we started with when we were doing the conservation, the committee used to make conservation brochures that utilities would be able to send out to their customers, and we were instrumental under Marianne's guidance in being the first state in the country to distribute, conservation kits to all of the consumer water customers throughout Connecticut. So we've got a lot of history to go from there. But with the sustainability, with the kind of we did the brochures, and then when they allowed us to put the CCR reports in the websites and so forth, there wasn't much call for brochures, so we kind of laid dormant. So, but we're back now as a sustainability committee, and primarily working on the committee. I'd like to recognize our committee members here: Kate Powell from Regional Water Authority. Okay, we have Ms. Pat Crabtree from Wallingford. Okay, Ms. Cindy Guardino from Connecticut Water Company. And myself, we're small but we're mighty. But if there's anybody that would want to participate and perhaps join the committee, we're always looking for members here and so forth. But basically, just to reiterate, just some of the mission statement that, and also Miss Lori Matthau, who is Matthew. How many years have I done that?
It's the same room that you mispronounced. It's the same room.
It's killer. Anyway, it's been a long time, since we've had representation from any state agency on any of our committees, and we are thoroughly excited that Lori joined in and jumped on the bandwagon with us, and I think we're going to make a lot of good things happen. But from being able to be sustainable, be resilient, our mission statement is on the website, but developing some PSAs. We're going to be doing some educational seminars as far as that goes for small water utilities. And both Marianne and Amy and I have worked together for many years in the conservation realm. We sat on the federal subcommittee that designed the conservation guidelines for the country. That was back in, remember that? Ages ago. And we were flying all around the country. They said it was only going to be 4 meetings. Well, 2 years later, I remember that. We finally got it done. But anyway, we're thoroughly excited, with Marianne taking time out of her schedule and Amy taking time. Amy comes down from Boston and Marianne comes from the other coast. Anyway, but we sincerely thank you guys for doing that. And also, ladies, I'd like to go around and would also like to, our posse here, we also have Miss Denise Rizika, who we also worked conservation when she was on her other hat with her DPH hat on. And thank you for coming. So I'd like to go around and just have some brief introductions. And Don, you're up.
I am Don Mitchell. I'm Director of Health, Chatham Health District, 6-town region here in the middle of the state on the eastern side of the river.
Teresa Gagnon, I'm with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the Water Bureau.
This is our same. Denise Rizika, I'm the Director of Water Planning and Management for DEEP.
George Logan, I'm bringing on the Water Company, Director of the Climate Management.
Senator George Logan, I'm on. Thank you. Quarian had that. All right, thank you, George.
Ken Scove, Manager of Water Resources and Infrastructure Planning at Aquarium Water.
Maureen Westbrook with the Connecticut Water Company and also Legislative Vice Chair for CWWA.
Catherine Zuby from the Council of Small Towns. Mary Dickerson, Planning and Economic Development Coordinator for the Town of Florida. I'm Pat Vance, I'm with Eversource Energy.
Hi, Pat. I think
I have a good
you have Okay. And Denise?
Hi, I'm Denise Savage. I'm the Conservation Director for the town of Greenwich. I also serve on the Water Planning Council Advisory Board.
So, great. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Laurie. Laurie's just going to do a kind of a brief overview of some of the Water Planning Council stuff and of some of our initiatives that we've outlined in our previous meetings. And Laurie, it's all yours. And hey.
You could take one and pass that around this way,
Okay.
and then there's a fact sheet coming.
And if as we start to begin discussion and so forth, I do have a little wireless that we can pass around. So we are being recorded, and this is for posterity's sake. And so this will be on the table. We can just pass it around. Laurie, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. There's information being passed around. Again, I'm Lori Matthew. I'm the section chief of the drinking water section, state. Can we close that, Dave?
Yes, yes.
State Department of Public Health. So if you have the information in front of you, there's two things. There's a summary of the new draft, final draft state water plan. 2 pages. And I brought this along with me, but I wish I could get everybody a paper copy, but I can't. As you can see, it's pretty heavy, it's over 600 pages. This is a
I've never seen that happen before.
this is the draft state water plan that is out for public comment, accepting comments from now until November 20th. The 4 state agencies involved, the Water Planning Council, are the State Department of Public Health, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, the Office of Policy and Management, and PURA, the Public Utility Regulatory Authority, make up the Water Planning Council that worked really hard using $1 million of state funds to produce this plan over the last year. We worked really hard with a group of a wide variety of stakeholders from across the state to put together this draft plan. We think it's a really excellent product. And as you see the 2-pager, I would ask you at some point, if you haven't read this, to read this and let it absorb because it's really well written. It's an excellent document. It says everything about what we did over the last year as a group of 4 agencies and stakeholders and stakeholder involvement. And it summarizes the 5 most important messages in the plan. And what I really love about it is, well, it says plan function, yeah, okay, whatever. But maintaining the highest quality drinking water of the state of Connecticut for drinking purposes is so very important. And we said that from the very beginning, that in the state of Connecticut, we are unique across the country. We have a law that protects our drinking water supplies at the highest level. And we want to maintain that for our citizens. And we all agreed we wanted to do that. But what would that take? What would that take? Is there's a lot of balance that needs to happen between environmental needs as well as public health needs. And so that's the 3rd bullet. Let's make sure we fully understand that and gather the information we need to be able to process that and understand it as state agencies. So for the very first time in that plan that's being passed around, there's great information on basins. Excellent science that's been pulled together for the very first time that I've seen this in one place. And then conservation. That's what we're here today to talk about. While Connecticut leads the nation in protection of its drinking water quality, the state lags in its conservation ethic. It's exactly what Marian came to my office and picked me up and drove me here. We spent the last half an hour talking about that. And over the last year, the drought that we had, that we went through, we need to change the ethic. We need to bring back what was done in the 80s, as Dave mentioned. 30 years ago, laws changed. And when I first was hired by Denise Ruzicka at the health department. That's what we worked on, retrofit kits, water conservation. Denise was leading the charge for the health department along with Marian. It's been 30 years. I think we need, when you think back about what happened to all of us last year, we need to make sure we have the steps in place, the mechanisms in place, so that we are not wasting a drop of water, that we are using that resource wisely, that we are doing what we can and the best that we can to explain how things could change. So when I spoke with Chuck Furlot, who's the CEO of Aquarian, back in September, we had a conversation about what was happening. And he said to me, Lori, we need to change the water conservation ethic. And I'm so happy that it's here, because those words came from his mouth. He's the CEO of the largest private water company in our state. And he said to me, this needs to change. And so we take that very seriously. So that really, at that time, that was September and October, and we were just getting in the middle of starting the discussions on the development of the state water plan. So I'm very happy to see that it made it into this plan and is one of the very most important parts. And the other handout is just a piece, a small piece within Section 5, just 3 pages, where we talk about a policy on water conservation. Now again, this is all draft. We're taking comment at this time until right before Thanksgiving. So it's a perfect time to be thinking in this group and this kind of coming together of the national experts that are here, Marianne and Amy, it's just wonderful, and Dave's group on sustainability. I'm so happy to be part of it, that you allow me to be part of it is great, because I think that in order to uphold what we've said we want to uphold is this balance. I think we have to work really hard on water efficiency and water conservation and think back of what we did, when we did it, and why did we do it, what happened to us last year, and what we need to do maybe for the next 5, 10, and 20 years moving forward. So I'm thrilled to be able to hand this information out. I'm very happy with what is in that state water plan. We're very proud of our draft that is out for comment. We have to get this plan in the hands of the governor and I think 3 or 4 key legislative committees, public health, environment, planning, development, and energy and technology by January 1 of next year. So we have work cut out for us, and all of us are working really hard at the agency level to work on outreach, get the word out about the plan, gather comments, and address those comments before the end of this year. So we have a lot to do, but it's very exciting. And this gathering, when Dave started talking about this with his committee, said this is perfect for us to introduce to a group of people that are thinking about conservation, people, experts on conservation, and start thinking about what we could do moving forward. What's important? Look back at what happened in 2016, in the early part of 2017. Think about what the state should be doing or not doing, and what are the steps maybe to get there. But what are some of the issues and concerns? And Marianne, we talked about that as well. What are the concerns? Let's put them on the table and talk them through. We heard from a mayor of a very large city that we had one of the orders out on and said, Laura, we can't afford these audits. We could do the audit. We could hand the audit findings to this industry, but they're going to save lots of money, but that means it's a very large financial impact to my water utility. So what does that mean? We should think about that. We should think about that. What can we do moving forward? So I'm very excited to be here today, and I will step away and let others talk, because we have people here that we really want to hear from. And I'm probably going to go sit on the other side so I can face you and listen to both of you. So I'm here to listen, and I'm very excited. I thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you very much, Lori. Again, part of the sustainability committee that we felt in working on our mission statement that Kate and Pat and Cindy and I worked on is basically we have issues, not only in conservation, but we have issues on sustainability. We have issues on succession planning, and it's good to see some young, new faces here. Thank you, Denise, for bringing, some newbies, because us old relics, they've been around a long time, and
This is going to be yours.
We are relics, yeah.
But anyway, again, what we've been trying to do with the Sustainer is to reach out to various groups and to various entities. And as you can see, we have representatives from COST here. We have representatives not only from Connecticut Water, but also representing CWWA. We have health officials. We have CCM, which my boss Susan is going to be here. She's the president of CCM right now. So we're reaching out. We did one presentation for the Lower River COG, Janice Elammeyer, and I think she's said she was going to be late, but that presentation was received very, very well. Lori presented as well as I, and we got some very, very good feedback from a lot of the CEOs from towns and so forth. So this is what we're trying to put together and develop lines of communication on, working on a variety of issues within the water industry, and that local towns and local water companies face, because a lot of times those entities kind of revolve in their own orbits, so we're trying to intersect those. So without any further ado, what I'd like to do is, as you know, that Marian Dickinson flew in from LA this morning and graciously came down to take time out of her schedule, as well as Miss Amy Vickers, who is they're nationally renowned water conservation experts. And rather than get involved in just PowerPoint presentations and that type of stuff, I thought we'd have them talk to us a little bit. And we have a wireless microphone. If you have questions, they are very well versed in not only water conservation, but as far as in relation to what's going on nationwide. So without any further, I'm going to, Marianne, would you like to go first, then Amy? Okay. So, Miss Marian Dickinson.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. This is always so much fun coming back to Connecticut. It's like coming home. I really love being here. So thank you very much for inviting me to come back. And I can't believe you've been chair since I left in '92. You are a trooper. You need a medal. Or more. So thank you, and thank you for keeping, the discussion going. Because Connecticut was a leader. We were the first, I think we were the first and maybe only state, right, Amy, that has done a statewide water conservation program? Yeah, I think, but Amy knows the statistics of what everybody else is doing around the country, and I think no one else has done it quite like we did. Not that the programs do kits anymore in that same way, but we were real leaders in the late 80s when we did that. And why did we do that? Why would a wet state like Connecticut be a leader in conservation? Well, we had a drought. We had a drought in '88 that was it started in '87, right, Denise? It was a drought just like what we just had been through. And we suddenly ended up with, 75 days of storage left. I mean, the drought, nobody was paying any attention to it until suddenly the reservoir levels dipped. And so it's really the sort of common adage of it's not how much it rains in your state, it's how much you have in storage. And if your storage is such that when you get to 50%, it's only a matter of days that are left, you have to think about conservation, even if you're in a wet state. And so New England actually was a fairly early leader. Massachusetts had policies, so did Rhode Island. Rhode Island still has very strong policies in state law. Connecticut developed the 3 bills that Denise was behind in 1989. Those were early leadership issues, so New England always was very much there. And lately now it's become an issue operationally for utilities as more and more of residential customers are installing automatic irrigation systems. I mean, let's face it, we never had these in New England before. People just did their hose dragging sprinklers, the oscillating sprinkler. You never really had in-ground irrigation like you have throughout the West. But the irrigation industry has been creeping across the country, and those in-ground systems are everywhere. And they're not being managed by landscapers who really understand pairing the irrigation to the needs of what the plant has. So we're finding that utility systems are being drained, their tanks are being drained overnight, and suddenly by these irrigation systems that come on at 4 in the morning, and then they have to pump them back up at high peak energy rates. It's becoming a real peak problem. We just did a study with American Water in New Jersey, in Bruce Springsteen's neighborhood of all places, where we were testing pairing smart technology and smart controllers with smart meters and having utility manage those irrigation systems so that they're not irrigating during peak days that are problematic. So it's now becoming, water conservation is also becoming an operations issue for many utility managers. And even in places that historically wouldn't have thought that they were water short like Arizona, they're now looking at conservation as a strategy in their toolkit for optimizing their utility operations and for also dealing with short-term issues with supply and longer-term issues as well. As our population grows and as we're expanding, we need additional supply, additional treatment capacity. that costs millions of dollars to our customers. If we can keep the demand flatter so that you don't need these expensive additions, you're actually providing, in the long run, rate relief to your customers. But all of this is fuzzy. It's really hard to explain to the average customer who doesn't have a clue how much water they even use or where their water comes from. I mean, we have done such a good job in the water utility world of providing that water at the tap in the cleanest possible, most affordable way, that the customer has long stopped thinking about where it comes from and what it goes through and what they're actually paying for. So these are the kinds of programs that we work on at the Alliance for Water Efficiency. And Maureen sits on our board. Amy used to sit on our board. Aquarion, DPH, Connecticut Water are all members of our organization. And as members, we provide you support to do the kinds of programs that are tailored to help you through what your issues are at the local and state level. So this national organization that we created is a service-oriented organization. We primarily work with water utilities around North America, U.S. and Canada, but we also work with businesses and industries, and we help them design cost-effective strategies. Now, what does that mean? It means you would spend less to get the water from water conservation than you would spend to get it any other way, either additional supply or paying for additional treatment. Whatever that capacity need is, water conservation will very likely be your cheapest way to achieve that, and we can run the numbers and help you analyze what that is. So we've developed tools for water utilities, models, and various tools to help them do that. But we also get involved not only at the local utility level in designing programs for communities, but we also get involved in state policies and helping states have a stronger presence in conservation. And one of the projects that we did back in 2012 is we did a state scorecard, which analyzes for water efficiency and conservation how the states all ranked in terms of what policies they had. And predictably, the highest ranking states were California and Texas, because those are states that are seriously got acute water shortage issues. But it's really interesting to see how the states ranked. We're now doing a new revision 5 years later, and it's my goal to get Connecticut's score really bumped up. So Lori and I are talking about how we can be of help to you. Come to the hearings on the water plan, come to any legislative sessions you might have. One of the pieces of legislation we could adopt here in Connecticut is setting, water sense level fixture standards. There are 4 states in the country that already have it: California, Colorado, Georgia. What state? Thinks theoretically, Georgia, and then Texas. And we could add Connecticut to that list. We can give you the draft language. Those fixtures are available widely. It's not like you're making customers spend more money. Likely they might be buying them anyway. But this would be a progressive policy that you could enact. California passed a retrofit on resale, requiring that as a property changes hands, it has to be retrofitted to the latest legal standard of plumbing fixtures. So those are the kinds of things that you could do that would, increase your perspective on and get what would be free savings for the water utilities. But the flip side of keeping your demand lower is this whole revenue issue. There isn't a water utility that I talk to ever that says, I don't care about the revenue. They all look at water conservation as a revenue reducer and as a reducer of revenue to the extent that they might not even meet their fixed costs. And that's an avoidable problem. That's one that we are spending a lot of time helping water utilities with. And we have rate models and rate materials and consumer messages about what the role is of conservation in the rates. Because customers all perceive, you ask me to conserve, I conserve, then you just raise my rate because you say you need more money because the sales are down. This is a negative cycle, and we work with utilities to help break that negative cycle. So we built a website called Financing Sustainable Water, all one word, .org. And if you go to that website, you'll see all kinds of resources that you can download free of charge. There are 2 videos. One video, what are you paying for in your water bill? And it's a little graphic 3-minute video that you can post on your website and send out to your customers. It shows how the cost of water goes up as it's going through all the system, the pumping, the treatment, the consumer use, and then the collection back for wastewater treatment and discharge. all of that process, that's what the customer is paying for. They're paying for that service. So it shows them where those costs occurred. And we designed it for an average residential water bill, but we can customize it to whatever your actual average water bill is. We also have another video that points out how conservation keeps rates lower, which is counterintuitive to what people think, so there's another video on that. And then there's a handbook for utility directors and their elected officials to explain a lot of these concepts and to help them in designing rates that will keep revenue stable, because that's the problem with utility revenue. It goes up and down and up and down, and conservation shouldn't be contributing to that. It should help stabilize it. So those are the kinds of things that we work on. We also provide sort of broad public support. We're working to help save the WaterSense program at the federal level and to make sure that that doesn't disappear under the budget cuts that have been proposed. And we're also very interested in helping you take advantage of new technology and new ways of analyzing data that are beginning to come through. And so as you're a part of our organization, we help provide you with lots of information about that. So we have information available on our website, which is Alliance for Water Efficiency, all one word, .org. I mentioned the Financing Sustainable Water site. We also have a consumer website called Home Waterworks. It's home-water-works.org. And it's got a really cool calculator that the consumer can use to figure out what they use in their household. And then we have lots of, reports and publications like the state scorecard, and projects that we're doing that we've gotten some funding for. The most recent one that we've issued is called NetBlue. This is a planning and zoning ordinance that requires new development in whatever overlay zone the community decides. New development would have to be water neutral. Couldn't increase demand. They'd have to offset their water use by retrofitting somebody else. So this is a draft ordinance plus the methodology in an Excel spreadsheet to help you calculate how much water that would need to be. So these are the kinds of things that we have developed to help communities, adapt to what is really sort of a changing water world that we live in. It's not just about how much it rains, it's about where the water's going, what the purposes are. Environmental flows can have the ability to reduce water supply allocations. How does that figure into long-term planning? So as you look at your water plan and adopt it going forward, we'd love to be of help to you and come and support you in hearings and be a partner with you in helping that happen. So I think that's enough for now. Yeah.
We're going to open it up for questions after.
Yeah, let's do that.
Feel free.
Okay.
Marian, thank you. As you can see, that we have a broad base of knowledge that's unsurpassable in this area and so forth. But we really do appreciate that. As Marianne alluded to, there's a lot of moving parts when we get into conservation, sustainability, resiliency, and so forth. Not only from the infrastructure side, but we also we have. A newbie to our committee that is in attendance is also Ms. Pat Mance, who is from Eversource. And as you know, that I think Eversource is the rumor is they're getting into the water industry. So Pat's going to talk a little bit about that to go from there. So right now, I'd like to bring up Miss Amy Vickers, and Amy is from the Boston area and has worked with many of the utilities throughout the state, locally and nationally. And if there's any question you have on conservation, these two ladies can answer it all here. Okay, so without any further ado, Miss Amy Vickers.
Dave, thank you. That's very generous. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's really great to be here, and it's so fun because, as Dave was saying, Marianne and I have worked all over the country for some years now, and it's great to be home in New England. I've been very fortunate the past 2 years. I've done quite a bit of work with the Aquarian Water Company. It's just been very interesting and just a great experience. What I'd like to talk about is I kind of want to start with a macro view a bit. I want to pick up a bit on what Lori was talking about at the beginning about an ethic. And want to look at where are we in terms of water use. You know, we talk about water conservation, we need to conserve, but you know, where are we on the scale of our current use, where do we want to go, what's possible and all of that, and where are the bright lights in terms of water systems, communities, technologies that are really changing the game. And I also want to talk about what's happening in Connecticut, but because I would say of any state in the country, I am extremely excited about what is happening here in Connecticut, both with the comprehensive planning that's going on, but also what happened as a result of the 2016 drought. So I'm going to circle back around to that. Just to give an overview, you know, if you look at water use in the United States, the average domestic use is about 88 gallons per capita per day. That's what the USGS told us in the most recent study. But if you, and that's combined indoor and outdoor. And a recent study of North American homes, a survey found that of those homes surveyed, indoor use is averages about 59 gallons per capita per day. So roughly there's about 30 gallons of outdoor use in that average. And we find that most cities and suburban communities, about 30 to 50% of demand is outdoor. And that really holds true a lot of places. It's a little less true here in New England, but there are exceptions. So for example, one of the studies I did for Aquarian a few years ago, we found that in their entire service area, the average single family home was using an average of about 83 gallons per capita per day. You know, so that's a little bit lower than the national average. But then we look at the top 1%, some of them are over 700 gallons per capita per day. So there's this big difference in terms of the average user and the top user. And in fact, when you look at the bottom 50% of water users, I call them the super savers. These really are the people who don't really need to conserve. Either they're not home, they're poor, they're super efficient. For whatever reason, they're not using a lot of water. So when we think about conservation, in a way, our problem and our area of focus is really in that top 25% of users. So I just think it's interesting to keep that in perspective. But going back to this average, roughly 88, 90 gallons per capita per day home usage we have in this country, if you look at existing technology in terms of plumbing fixtures, appliances, what we use in our homes, if every home in America retrofitted their fixtures, their average indoor use would probably be about 35 gallons per day or less per person. And that's down from about 59. So it's a significant reduction in demand that is possible. So there's a tremendous opportunity for savings there. But in many ways, we're starting to move toward that as, again, some of these surveys are showing water use is continuing to go down on the indoor side. But the outdoor is the problem, and Marianne was talking about that a few minutes ago, these peaking issues that are driving a lot of these capital facility projects and such. But here's the bright light. If you look at communities that are enacting policies and programs to really tamp down that outdoor water use, it's making a huge difference. And before I get to Connecticut, I want to mention a project I'm working on right now, which I think is interesting, because I think it's a bellwether for the country. Working on a project in Cary, North Carolina. Cary's an interesting community. It's been written up by National Geographic. It's a relatively new community, a lot of new housing. It has the highest concentration of PhDs and MDs of any community in the country, so it's relatively affluent. It's right outside of Research Triangle Park. What's interesting about Cary, you've got a lot of nice homes, a lot of yards, etc. Their average single family use, indoor and outdoor combined, is 60 GPCD, and that's today. Wow. And we're projecting it's going to go down even further. Why is Cary so low in a community that's affluent, that has lawns, etc.? For several reasons. Number one, there is a very strong ethic there. We just did a survey, and numbers haven't been published yet, but they're among all age groups, among all socioeconomic groups, everyone is very aware of water conservation. Cary is also a new community. A lot of the builders who came in and built those homes and those landscapes were thinking native grasses, limited turf areas, etc., 10, 20 years ago. And we're seeing the fruits of that wisdom now in this very low demand that they have. Again, 60 GPCD, and we're projecting it's going to go even lower. So I think it's interesting. There are communities today that are seeing that very low water use, and I think it's an indicator of where we can go, and in many ways we can go even lower. Because even though Cary, again, is a new community, has a lot of new fixtures, again, their indoor is going to be going down. We expect their outdoor is going to go down as well. I think they're going to be down to about 50 GPCD probably in a few years. They also do have a permanent alternate day watering schedule. It's actually about every 3 days, which I think is generous. A lot of people there don't irrigate, though. We found in the survey that less than half of the people we surveyed don't even irrigate at all. So that's significant. But going back to what's possible here in New England, and again going back talking about Aquarian, and I think some of the numbers for Aquarian, because it's such a large service area in Connecticut, may reflect many other towns as well. When we looked at some of their recent water use, again, their average single-family use is about 83 GPCD. But many as you know, we had a very severe drought last year, and in the southern portion of the state in particular, towns like Greenwich, New Canaan, Darien, and Stamford in particular were really stretched in terms of supply and also water use. And one of the things that Aquarian found last year when they imposed, at one point actually, a ban on outdoor water use, in some communities demand went down over 50%. Now, here's what's exciting in terms of what's happened, I think, in the southern portion of the state. As many of you know, Aquarian now has a permanent rule in those 4 towns, maximum 2-day per week watering. And just recently I got an email from Jeff Ulrich, who's director of planning at Aquarian. He was telling me that in May, June, and July, average demand in those 4 towns is down 17%. Total demand from what it was just the average of the past 2 years. That's a significant reduction. 17% reduction, and I think, I can't speak for Aquarian, but I think a lot of that is probably from that 2-day restriction. So in my mind, that's one of the examples of, we talk about technology or policies, that 2-day restriction is a very powerful tool to permanently reduce demand. And in fact, last December we had a workshop in Stamford. Lori and a lot of other people were there talking about what can we do in Connecticut, and this was one of the things that we were talking about. And we had a guest speaker from Dallas, Texas, talking about their 2-day rule. And what they found in Dallas is, as a result of their maximum 2-day watering restriction, what they've had since 2011, their total demand has gone down an average of about 13%. And this is a city that's growing fast. So Dallas is also doing some other things, but that 2-day restriction is making the difference. So what I want to say is, of any one thing you can do statewide to permanently reduce your demand, to help make your systems more drought resistant, think again about being a national leader, setting a policy statewide that's going to affect every user in this country and permanently reduce your water demands, help restore and boost your stream flows, and set an example for everyone else. And again, I'd encourage you to keep following what's happening with Aquarian. We've talked about this. Strongly urge you to consider having a statewide rule, mandatory maximum 2-day watering per week. That's more than enough for everyone. Many lawns don't need any watering at all, some only once a week. You're not going to be adversely affected by this. It's going to save you, I think, a tremendous amount of water. Here's one of the key things to think about in having that policy. Is, I mentioned again, the 4 towns, Greenwich, Darien, New Canaan, and Stamford. Aquarian imposed the 2-day watering rule, permanent. However, that only affects Aquarian customers because they're a private water company. So that rule does not apply to people with private wells, ponds, those who have any kind of reuse system. So thinking statewide, public and private water suppliers, I think you want to think about plugging that loophole and saying, if we have a 2-day watering restriction, applies to everyone, whether public supply, private supply, whatever. And that's important, number one, to make sure that everyone abides by the same rules, but number two, that you can enforce it. Because one of the problems we've seen in communities that have restrictions that only apply to public systems is enforcement is very hard. It's very confusing. And I'll give you an example. Orange County Utilities in Florida, it's in the Metro Orlando area. I've worked with them for several years. And one of the problems they have had with enforcement is that the rule only applies to, again, their publicly supplied homes and businesses. There's a lot of private irrigation wells there. So it's very tough for the enforcement officers as well as the community to see that some people are watering and they're not getting tickets, but other people can't water on certain days. So again, you need that uniformity. So that's a key part of all of that. So I just want to close again. That's really my message. That's my one really strong message. Of any one thing you can do is enact a policy. And actions speak louder than words. And ethics are important, but people need to have standards and rules they know to live by. just really in closing on that note, again, I'm going to go back to Aquarian, but there were such dramatic savings when they put their restrictions in last year, and now they're at a 17% reduction in those communities. And I think what we're going to see, whether it's Aquarian communities or other communities, if you have this mandatory 2-day restriction, you're going to start drought resisting your system. You're going to have fuller reservoirs. You're not going to have the extreme peaks and the ups and downs that historically so many of us have had to deal with. We're going to have more reliable, stable systems. And when severe droughts do come, yes, we may have to put in more restrictions like a 1-day per week restriction or no watering. But we won't have the severe extremes in our supply capacities and changes in demand. So I think I'm going to close with that. In fact, I'd like to almost leave that really as something on the table. I'd love to hear your comments on that and your thoughts. And again, I hope that's something that people will strongly consider. And again, look at the experience of Aquarian, the water savings they're achieving. I think even more to come. Thank you.
Well, if we're talking about making Connecticut on the forefront with a bench this deep, and a bullpen like that, unbelievable. Thank you, Amy. And again, when we talk about conservation and sustainability and resiliency, and that's the buzzwords that are around in all of the entities that we're trying to reach out to as far as cost, CCM, the Lower River COG, and so forth. Those are things that really kind of rise to the level of really importance. So next, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to bring up Ms. Pat Bands, and she is a representative from Eversource, and Pat kind of snuck in late at our River COG presentation, and she was nice enough to ask for the presentation that Lori and I did. And Pat is a welcome addition to our committee in sustainability, and Eversource, as we all know, as far as that goes, are in the forefront of energy throughout the Northeast. And so forth. So would like to get Pat's perspective on energy. Pat, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much, Dave. I'm Pat Bands. I'm a community relations representative for the company. And I guess it goes to show what happens when you ask Dave for the presentation. But back in June, our company announced that we were broadening our horizons and getting into the water business. And we've made, there's an offer on the table right now to purchase Aquarian and to join with them and become partners with them. It is currently in the regulatory process. As we know, that could be a while, but I think the goal is that by the end of the year, we hope to close and start moving towards that. I'm going to say right up front, I know nothing about water. I have no idea what that acronym was, DPTCD, whatever that is, I don't know. I mean, we're just dipping our toes in this right now. So we're happy to be part of this, and like Dave said, a lot of the concepts that I'm hearing, sustainability, conservation, resiliency, all of those concepts we apply right now to our electric and gas business, and we'll be applying those as well as we evolve into this water business. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Pat. Appreciate it. Okay, and again, with as you can see, the broad base of partners that we have participating, we've got a lot of deep resources. If you have questions and so forth, there's certainly enough resources within the room. What I'd like to do, and again, when we talk about conservation, and I know Marianne and Amy and I ran into this, years ago when we started saving water. Well, we save water, our revenues are going to go down, especially when you're dealing with a vast entity of water utilities. And in Connecticut, primarily, we have the three types. We have the quasi-publics, which are the regionals, the MDCs. We have the investor-owns, obviously, Aquarion and Connecticut Water. And then we have what we call the munis, which are, Portland and Middletown, and basically operated by the municipalities. So everybody has their own perspectives on, what conservation is, how it affects them, and it affects companies in different ways. I know, and just to relate back when we had to hand out the conservation kits back in the 90s, okay, and as you know, I'm involved with an aggressive student program, and we have students here that are filming us tonight. And but when we implemented that, most water utilities throughout the state either handed them out, mailed them. Okay, most of them mailed them. Okay, I came up with the cheap way. Okay, I had our students. It cost me I think a dozen pizzas. And they handed out the water conservation kits. But more importantly, that ethic that we were able to instill in the community. Within 6 months, I had our finance director coming to me. He says, our water revenues are down 20%. And it's good in one way and bad in another. But when you're not planning on that, but this is the whole idea of planning. So, what I'd like to do is, if you have questions. Lori, why don't you come up here and sit with the microphone, so if people have questions that we can answer.
I had a thought, but this is more of like a round table.
Sure.
So we can kind of break into that. But our friend Denise is here from
Okay.
Greenwich, and maybe she's the conservation director of the town of Greenwich. She's been conservation director for the town of Greenwich for a very long time, 20 years. And Greenwich being in the middle of the storm with the drought last year, I think some perspectives from Denise's point of view, and because you're here because you're very interested as a townwide initiatives and what you've been doing for decades. I think it'd be interesting to hear some of Denise's perspectives, conservation and water.
Hello. I guess, there we go. Okay. Denise, thank you so much for coming up.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, and thank you, Lori. A few folks know that Greenwich has been at the forefront of the water discussion in this community, in this state, for a long time. The droughts seem to always hit hardest there. We have some real flashy water supply systems, some smaller reservoirs, and since I've been in Greenwich, so I wasn't here for the 80s drought. I became the director of conservation in Greenwich in '97, and we have either put on drought restrictions or been put on at least voluntary every other year since I've been there. Sometimes it's been 2 years in a row, but basically we're looking at that this is not something that happens once a decade or once every 20 years. We have been doing this every other year at least. And so I think we need to talk about that. And one of the things that I've been working on with the Water Planning Council was the drought management plan. But I have to say that as we started really getting into the watershed management plan, and the drought plan needed to be updated, and it took us a long time to get there, and it's still not quite adopted yet because we're working on this before that gets finalized. But one of the things with the drought management plan is that's not water conservation. And I think we really need to take a step back from that and understand, and that's one of the challenges we have with education and what we're dealing with in Greenwich and the communities when Aquarion decided to go to the 2-day water restrictions. Like, we were in a drought, we had an emergency situation, we put on restrictions, everybody responded to that, but they're all going like, and why do we have 2-day restrictions now? And it's a totally different mindset. It's about water conservation, and it's one of the things we need to be looking at. I'm very excited about the water conservation work that's in the new state water plan. But any of you who have been at any of the water hearings or the hearings on the water plan have heard me get up and say, this needs to be stronger. It needs to be the central piece. Laurie's pushing it, and I know that there's some other folks who are, but there's some other folks who really are looking at the economic side of this, and there's some challenges, and some of them have been brought up. We're thrilled with the work that Aquarian did this year. Greenwich was waiting for this. We were waiting for this. And I think we all know that the changes in the decoupling that happened with the water utilities allowed Aquarian to step up to the plate and make this, because what they're doing for water conservation doesn't impact their revenue side anymore because of the decoupling. And I totally agree with Amy. We need to move forward with this statewide. It was one of the things I talked about when we were looking at adopting this. The idea was, should Aquarian do this? Should the municipalities do this individually? Or should we do statewide? I thought it should be done statewide, and quickly realized that wasn't going to happen until we address the water rates for the other water companies, the town water companies and the regional water authorities. That has to take place so that we can do this. We have to, it's actually the forefront, and I would say coming out of this, it's the number one thing, because to do what Aquarian is doing in our area is not going to happen. I will say that the towns totally agree with Amy in terms of that we have to do it on public as well as private at the same time. We did that with all the restrictions. We made sure that the literature went out that said, and we worked very hard with Aquarian on this, so the literature that went out said there's 2-day water restrictions townwide. We didn't make a distinction in the literature. That said, Aquarian can only enforce, obviously, in the public. Most of the towns do not have an ordinance. Greenwich does have an ordinance. We have the enforcement capabilities within our town. We are, so we do have the 2-day water restrictions. That said, we're kind of doing that somewhat operating at under our emergency response and doing it as a resilience. And what we're looking at doing is the departments of health statewide have a lot of, so the local departments of health have a lot of capabilities, and we're looking at putting together a local ordinance for our local health department, putting these restrictions on so that it will, so that we're going to be doing that this fall, looking at how we make sure that we get that passed, and our health department is looking at being, putting together a model ordinance that hopefully can be used by other health departments across the state for those on wells. And I think that's one of the things with the state water plan, is it's starting to talk about wells a little bit more. But I know that was one of the other big things, just to let you know, that we were pushing, is that you cannot just deal with water supply in this state only from the idea of public water supply and whatever. We just have too many people on wells. And as recent as a week and a half ago, I got an email from a resident in Greenwich who has a shallow well at 500 feet. One of the things we're seeing is the well, they have to drill deeper and deeper and deeper. So we're looking at that. And I just wanted to put out, and then I'll be quiet, and we can have let everybody else have a bigger discussion, is in 2002, USGS did a groundwater study in Greenwich. It was based on a model, and it was looking at the water use at that time, and obviously modeling after some of the stuff coming out of Aquarian in terms of how much use we had, which goes up astronomically by property size and by the area and lawn. And I know it's grown since that study was done, but that study at the time was saying that in our area, and it's what we call backcountry Greenwich, so it's the backside around the Merritt Parkway and north, and it's the same thing that's happening in Stamford and Darien and New Canaan, is that we're using more water than is recharged. So, in any given year you get a lot of rain, maybe you're not taking as much out, but over the long term, and it was a very small rate, it was like 0.1% we're going, but all of a sudden it's like, wow, over 10 years, over 20 years, and it's basically decreasing the amount of water. I'm now talking with USGS and John Mulaney and the folks there, and saying, can we have an updated study, and can we do it not just for Greenwich but for our region? But I think it's something we need to be looking at statewide, is the well issue. So just wanted to put that out there, that we're engaged in that and looking to move that forward as well, and see what we can do, because it is part of the constituency we have to educate. And like I said, I totally agree with Amy. You cannot all of a sudden put a restriction on in town where on one side of the street who's serviced by the water company, they can't want to. Oh, and the last thing is the landscaping, and we'll talk about that piece. But this issue with landscaping and what needs to be done, there's so much education about soil health, choosing the right plants. And I will say that the tie-in between water conservation and water quality is so extreme that the other piece of this water conservation does need to be focusing on this water quality aspect that is related to the same thing. People who are irrigating their lawns are also putting a lot of chemicals to sustain those lawns, and we really need to be paying attention to that as well. So, thank you.
Thanks, Denise. All right, appreciate you coming. Again, reaching out to the various entities here, we have CCM is all, Susan is on her way. She's at another meeting, but we also have Ms. Catherine Doobie from COST, Council of Small Towns, and again, we reached out to them. Kathleen, is there anything from the COST perspective that the committee might be helping working out with?
Thank you. So as I sit here, this is probably one of my first meetings specifically targeted to water conservation. And as we saw last year, there were a lot of different, we represent the entire state. So there are different things happening in different parts of the state. But it's helpful, I think, as we start the process of educating towns and as we start looking at, what does conservation mean? To each individual town, from a well to a public, and how that's being reinforced. I think that that's going to be critical for me, to educate our towns. Because that was kind of my first question. Just even looking at my own home, we operate on a well, and we really, quite honestly, as everyone in the state was looking at the decrease in reservoirs and all of that, we didn't really do anything different. And so, how does that play into the overall supply? I think will be key for us to continue the education process and help to change behavior so we can get to where we need to be as a state.
Great. And if there's anything from, bullet points, I know we got some great feedback from the COG as far as they would like a very, very simple fact sheet, that, local officials can look at without going through the jargon and all that, and to help them to go from there. But I know sitting right next to you, we have Miss Maureen Westbrook, who is wearing two hats. She is not only a tri-chair on the Connecticut Waterworks Association, but she is Vice President at Connecticut Water Company. So, Maureen, give us a private utilities perspective on where we're going here.
All right, thank you. And I would echo what Denise said, and certainly the ability to have the water revenue adjustment, or essentially decoupling, for private water companies has been huge for us. And I think, it allowed Aquarian to do what they did. It's allowed us to do some innovative programs with our customers. We did a water drop challenge, a contest with our customers, and they combined, we saved, I think, 80 million gallons through that effort there, with about 5% of our customers participating. We're doing education stuff that we hadn't done before, and because it does not impact the bottom line. So it has taken away that disincentive that historically has been there. And so I think to find a way to make that work for the others allows for a broader statewide conversation that will be very important. And I think, the more we can do to advance that, the better. I think it's been very well received by our customers. We do customer sat surveys every year and ask them what they think about conservation initiatives, and that's important to them. While we characterize as Connecticut not having an ethic, we have a lot of environmentally oriented people. They may not think about it when they think about how they're using their water, but that was largely how we got the water revenue adjustment passed, was working with the environmental groups who saw the benefit to it for in-stream flows and the issues that that we share in those areas. So I think that's a big piece. If we can get the revenue piece, addressed, I think you can get a lot more people on board and a much broader support for this.
Just for the lay people in the room, can you just delineate decoupling?
Yeah,
okay,
basically, what it allows us to do is agree that whatever our rates were that were approved, our revenues that were authorized in our last rate case, which the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority goes through all of our expenses and our revenues and tells us what we can charge our customers on a unit basis. But what now this says is, if you have conservation and you use less water and less revenues come in, you are guaranteed to get those revenues that you had authorized. So it allows you the next year to put a surcharge on your customers' bills for any shortfall. Now, if we have a windfall year and our customers use more, we have to give them a credit the next year. So it protects the customers either way, but obviously our experience has been, as we're driving water usage down, that it has been a adjustment. It's been a couple, 3%, so it has not really made our customers scream or really think it as a big issue, but it has allowed us that confidence that we have those rates coming in, the revenues coming in that were authorized in our rates, so that we can move forward and do these things, so.
Great, thanks, Maureen.
And
Before,
if I can add just
Sure.
one thing on the, the water use restrictions, certainly as wearing my CWWA hat, there was a lot of conversation last year as we worked with the Save Our Water groups and the anti-bottled water initiatives and things like that about different conservation measures. And it did come up about both, should we be looking at mandatory lawn watering restrictions as a statewide legislative thing, and the concept of local ordinances. And there was some interest, certainly, and I think even cost characterized it this way, to get 169 ordinances adopted is going to be a challenge. And the process locally is 6 months to a year, and a cost for those communities. So if there are things that we could agree would make sense on a statewide basis, it would probably facilitate it much quicker than relying on individual ordinances. Because there's been a model ordinance out for 15 years probably that has not really gotten traction, so.
So the model ordinance would do what?
Well, we're saying to avoid a model ordinance and just pick out the best in there, whether it's to have limitations on outdoor water use, whether it's to provide for enforcement mechanisms, whether it's to authorize water companies to basically put a charge on you if you violate the water restrictions. Whatever we decide makes sense to really move this along. I think the more you can codify on a statewide basis, A, it makes us a leader, but B, it allows it to happen across the board as opposed to incremental pockets where it's successful and others where it is not.
And I have to say, I agree. I think that what the 2-day-a-week ordinance should be across the board. Then you don't have to worry about it. I'm anticipating that it's going to take a while to do certain things, so that's why our health department is looking at moving forward, because we need to do this.
Sure.
And there are some areas of the state that I think are not going to be able to wait until we work through all of this, because I don't see any ordinances happening until this gets adopted. We're going to have a process here, so I'm just putting that out there, that for some local areas that need to take control sooner, there's potential to do that on wells,
Right.
through the health department. So that's where we're going. But I totally agree that, and that's where I wanted to go in the first place. And then that decoupling thing was, if that has to be taken care of first, or it's not going to pass.
Right.
Mary, pass the microphone over there. Mary Dickinson's our.
I work in economic development, but I also work in strategic planning. And I think one of the tools that's kind of being missed here is the plan of conservation and development. And as we can get to communities when they're rewriting their POCDs and get some conservation efforts put into those POCDs, I think you're going to start to see change. Working with a number of towns in Middlesex County, I can tell you the only ones that I know of that have specifically addressed water were Haddam and Durham. And the reason was they had severe contamination issues that impacted economic development within their business districts. And then it hit people in the pocketbook because it impacted home values. So people would go to sell, they weren't getting the price they wanted for their house, they weren't able to get mortgages, people that were looking to buy that were trying to take out equity lines. So I think going back to the POCD and getting these towns to include in their 10-year plan of conservation and development a move for their boards and commissions to start making conservation a priority. Here in Portland, we have areas in town where there was some blasting and people lost their wells. And so the aquifer had changed. And then we had people that had been in houses 45, 50 years having to drill new wells. 700 feet for some of them was lucky. We saw some of them going down 1,100, 1,200 feet for a home that's been in that same location for 50 years. And so as we see development coming in, we see other homes and other developments drawing off that same aquifer. So there's a lot of benefit to really working, I think, with these towns and getting them to look at these issues through their POCD and then making the people more aware as they go through the process of writing them.
Great, thanks, Mary. Marianne and Amy, is there any appetite on a national level of number one, decoupling and where that sits, and also Mary's point to put on the conservation and development?
Well, I think there's a lot of it's, rate making is state by state, and sometimes even by county. So decoupling on a national level, I'm not even sure if I've heard a discussion of it. Again, public utility commissions, it's a state activity, not a federal.
Mhm.
There's so many different ways that water systems are managed, both public and private. I think it would be pretty tough, at least as far as I can see, to have something national as a policy.
So as Amy says, every state does it differently. So the state of Wisconsin has a public service commission, which is like PURA here, but they regulate both the privates like we do here in Connecticut, but also the public agencies. Municipal water systems are also regulated in terms of how rates are approved. And they're the only state that I think I know of that does that. And the water utilities, as you can imagine, the public water managers fought this tooth and nail when Public Service Commission was trying to adopt this. But then once it was adopted, they realized, oh, this actually helps us, because now we have the cover of the Public Service Commission when the consumers complain that their rates are going up or that a surcharge has been put on. And so that's actually equalized things in Wisconsin between the public and the private. But the rest of the country, you've got the private utilities who are able to do the cost recovery if their regulatory commissions have allowed it. And then you've got the public systems that struggle and don't want to do those surcharges because there's huge consumer backlash to it. So if they don't have a way to recover that lost revenue, if they're not annually adjusting their rate structures, then they are going to find themselves in a hole. And that's one of the big problems. The public water systems are saying, oh my God, it's such a nightmare to do a rate hearing. We don't want to do it except maybe every 5 or 6 years. And if you wait that long in between when you're examining what your revenues are bringing in every year, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. And bond rating agencies are now looking at this. So your bond rating could be in jeopardy if you're not annually adjusting your revenues to make sure your revenues are matching what you say your projections are for your sales. And City of Fort Worth in Texas got downgraded in their bond rating because they weren't making this adjustment. So the big headline in the paper was, Fort Worth bond rating downgraded because of water conservation. But Fort Worth didn't have a water conservation program. These were just the normal variability in demand that you get when it's a wet year or a dry year. Your sales vary, if it's a wet year or a dry year. But they just weren't paying enough attention to it.
Or that was fake news.
Or
Before it was in.
They just got there early. Told you you're a trendsetter. Could I just jump in and say that what Marianne and the Alliance have done on revenue and educating finance and utility managers is absolutely essential and is so important. It's groundbreaking. One of the really fundamental things I think we need to talk about, we talk about revenues and rates, and I think this is even true for finance managers and water utility managers, but particularly the public. They need to understand that if they conserve, yes, your rates will go up, but your water bill should not increase necessarily, except for other costs and charges that would occur. In fact, it may go down slightly if O&M reduces. So that's a really important concept.
And it certainly goes down over time.
Yeah, to convey, and Marianne has helped sponsor studies which have shown this. With conservation, again, your rates may go very high, but because demand is down, your water bill is staying about the same. In some cases, it's actually gone down. And as she just pointed out, in some cases averted having to build new capital facilities, again, which benefits the consumer. So talking about decoupling in another way, we've got to help educate the public. An increase in your rates does not necessarily equate to an increase in your water bill. So that's a really important concept, I think. It's very basic, but a lot of people don't get it. So I think that's something we need to educate people about more.
And in fact, it frees up revenue for needed system improvements over time. We are an older part of the country. Some of our pipes are older than newer parts of the country. And if that's the message, is sustainable rates, and which coupled with conservation, by decoupling, lead to stable revenues and the ability to do the necessary upgrades. That's a win-win across the board. And where the struggle, I think, is at the municipal level, because the cost and the necessary expertise to do some of these financial rate studies, and that's where, even if small-sized municipality on some of this basic rate-making structures that make it sustainable, that's a win-win across the board. So I just urge everybody that that's a way to go, with that, have that conversation. And then I'd also point out, as in a relatively water-rich state, and we are water-rich, water is an economic driver, but we have to have it be sustainable, across the board. And we have to realize that, except for the landscapers, lawns just for economic growth. That's not a product, like other industries that we can bring into this state. So we have to look at that. So, and that's why when we're seeing that most of our water is being lawns, that is something we can fix. And that's something that could be a big selling point to say, we've got water available, and we got it available for the things that need high quality Class A water. And we're making sure that the things that don't need Class A water aren't using Class A. That's a win-win for the state, and that's long-term economic growth sustainability.
If I could just pick up on what Denise is saying, just going back to what we were talking about earlier, one of the things I would encourage you to look at, looking at having a statewide policy, again, a maximum 2-day per week watering, what are the benefits in terms of reduced chemical applications you're going to see on your lawns and your landscape that won't be going into your drinking water? This is a big issue. I mean, there have been studies by EPA and others saying that we apply 4 to 10 times more chemicals per acre of lawn than we do on agricultural land, which is really saying a lot. So again, there are public health benefits here, there are water quality benefits. I would encourage you to put that into the mix in calculating, what are we going to get from this and what is it going to cost us? And that's where I'm, again, I think there's a lot of excitement about, again, this isn't just about saving the quantity of water, this is about preserving water quality. And just to pick up on Denise Rosica's point about contractors, if you look at really green communities that have low watering use, that have organic lawns and such, their landscape contractors, they've got all kinds of new work, whether it's organic gardens people want, organic mulches, soils, etc. The need for those services and that economy are not going to go away. People are not going to lose jobs. In some cases, yes, it will be about doing different things, but there already is an organic land care movement out there to support you. And again, I think you can team with them, you can help them grow. There's wonderful opportunities for job growth in that sector, which is why landscape contractors who specialize in this area do very well. In fact, if you want to learn more about it, check out the Northeast Organic Farming Association. They have a whole organic land care committee and members. Many of them are in Connecticut. So again, there's opportunities here for teaming with other organizations. Again, benefits to water quality, helping the economy, and reducing water use.
So one of the movements that's happening nationally is a movement that says, you've got water coming to a customer, why do we use it once and then discharge it back out for treatment? Why don't we at least use it several times before we send it away? So to get to Amy's point about treated drinking water, Class A drinking water being put for irrigation, why do we do that? Why don't we take water that's already been used in, say, showers or clothes washers and cycle that back out into irrigation? One of the reasons we don't do it is that we haven't developed the body of regulatory guidance on the water quality issues. That's work that's now being done by a Blue Ribbon Task Force nationally to enable states to adopt standards that might allow a sufficient amount of on-site recycling just for the purpose of non-potable water use. And that will be a game changer, especially in systems that are really struggling to meet demand where they don't have a lot of new supply alternatives. So the concept of just, you got the water on site, let's use it to the best extent we can possibly before we end up discharging it and letting it go.
And the leaders there are golf courses and ski resorts.
Right. If I could jump in on this, again, I'm going to go back to Cary, North Carolina. Check out this town. When that town really started growing about 20 years ago, they put in one of the first reclaimed water systems on the East Coast. You know what they're looking at now? Getting rid of it. Because demand is it's expensive. Demand is going down so much. They're finding the trend. The attitude is we don't think we need to water. It's not good for the environment. New housing is coming in, smaller lot sizes. People don't have the lawns and landscapes irrigation. So, yes, I think we should look at reclaimed, although personally I feel like.
No, I didn't mean reclaimed. This isn't centralized reclaim system.
You're
This
talking
is on-site.
Point of views.
Point of views.
But when you look at how much
'Cause that's-
water
it's too
you need
expensive.
for irrigation, some point of view systems work, but oftentimes it's greatly limited, for example, gray use systems. But again, looking at some of these bellwether cities and towns where there is a green ethic, and we have a whole generation of young people now buying homes that are very different from the baby boomers, this is already in
Tiny
their
houses.
thinking. Some of them don't need this education, so there's a lot changing. So again, I would just, again, look at some of these communities that already have this ethic, what direction they're going. They're going toward no lawn watering in some cases.
And it seems like that's still a big part of what the Sustainability Committee is going to do or cover, which I think is very important. But when we give it the title of sustainability, the sort of breadth, the scope of what could be covered in that is quite broad. So I certainly think moving forward, just in terms of coming to some sort of understanding of what the focus of the Sustainability Committee is going to be, if it's going to be heavily on water conservation, which I think it probably should be. I think that makes sense. But to make that clear, so for an organization like AWWA, it would give us more of an idea of who we're going to suggest to come and be a part of this committee. When I look at sustainability, my role at AWWA is Director of Environmental Management, right? So protection of the environment as far as sustainability from that standpoint, from a water utility perspective is important. But I also deal with things like energy efficiency in terms of how we operate our facilities and the like. So it's a big part of it well. So again, when I look at a sustainability committee, is that something that we're going to consider as part of the scope of what we're going to be covering? Not to mention that as I run down these items, there's a lot behind most of it. So things would have to be handled in an organized way. Financial stability. We talked a little bit earlier about rate structure, and when we talk about sustainability, how about small systems and consolidation? I mean, these aren't topics or subjects that are new to anyone here, but just in terms of this committee and how we're going to go about addressing these issues, because as we have these meetings, we could spend an hour more easily in any of these topics. And then the role of sustainability and water utilities when it comes to economic development, because in my role, previous role at AWWA, I was Director of Engineering. I dealt with developers. I dealt with municipalities, and economic development was a big part of the plans for development for a lot of the communities. So economic development, as it comes to sustainability of the community and the role of the water utility, also plays a big role. We chatted a little bit about succession planning. I think that's a big part as well, so I'm glad to hear that that is being covered by this committee. Customer affordability in terms of sustainability, and even just in terms of the message, how we're going to tell folks or explain to folks that although you're conserving, although your rates may go up, overall you may spend the same or less. Well, customers may say, well, why would I want to, if I'm conserving, why would I want my rates to go up even to spend as much as I have been on water? So explaining to them why we're doing it in terms of infrastructure improvements and all those sorts of things that are still necessary, I think certainly will be a challenge. Infrastructure costs and improvements. I mean, certainly conservation plays a role within that, but just in terms of sustainability and the whole issue of utilities covering the cost of infrastructure improvements. We know as far as water is probably the most capital intensive of all the utilities in terms of the cost. The cost for replacing a foot of water main, for example, is huge, is astronomical. Not to mention the energy costs and the facility costs that we have. So when you talk about sustainability of water as an industry, I think that's a topic that deserves some attention, I think, through this committee. We also have the issue of just keeping up with the ever more stringent water quality standards, right? As they keep increasing, smaller water companies, public water systems have more and more of an issue of keeping up with those standards. So, obviously that could be tied into small system consolidation, but that is something as well when I look at the broad term sustainability. I'm also just curious as why we changed the name of the committee from the Conservation Committee, which is a huge amount, a topic to deal with, to sustainability. I know sustainability is sort of the buzzword of the day, kind of thing. But it does open up the committee to a much larger scope, which again I think may be justified or not. But when I was back at Aquarian, my boss John Hurley, the first thing he asked, he says, "Well, when you go there, George, try to find out what the focus of the sustainability committee is, because between he and I, of the things that we're covering, there's a lot involved there." So my report back to him is going to be, it looks like the majority of the focus is still going to remain with conservation, water conservation, which I think makes sense. But out in the public, outside of this committee, other folks may have broader or different expectations of this committee, basically for the title. We just have to be, I think we'd have to be just clear in terms of how we're going about it. For example, with all these different topics, there's also, perhaps we could be themed in terms of how we handle these different topics. Maybe this is the water conservation year, or maybe the first 6 months or the first 3 meetings we're going to deal with water conservation, and next we'll deal with energy efficiency or something of the like. So I think all of that is important, and Aquarian is certainly ready to do whatever we can to support whatever the major goals and initiatives of the Sustainability Committee are. And Ken, I don't know if you have anything you want to add from the engineering perspective.
Thanks, George.
I just want to add a few things. You've already heard that we're doing the 2-day-a-week irrigation in Lower Fairfield counties, and at Aquarian we have a conservation committee, and George and I are both on the conservation committee. I guess there's about 10 members, and we work on all these, how we're going to do conservation, what we're going to do in the future, and so we're seeing how it's worked in Lower Fairfield counties. We're getting great results, and Amy's done a report for us. That's more people in engineering are looking at that, but that's another part of the discussion. But now we're looking where we go forward. What do we do in the future? Do we expand it? We're talking about potentially other water systems. We have, 70 water systems, and where we'd expand it in the future. So we're looking at potentially doing that. And right now we're doing it, conservation is sort of on a committee level. We all have our jobs, and we sort of pull together and work on this. But in the future, we're probably gonna need some staff to do the kind of things we want to do. So I just wanted to mention those things. So that's about it. I think George covered the rest, and you already know the other things we're doing. So
Thanks, Ken. Maureen, you got? Hold on. Maureen has something there.
I do think to add to that, or to build on what George said, I think the question of kind of the, what are we doing, energy management and all that other stuff, I think in a lot of our organizations, that comes under the umbrella of sustainability. And I think there's a lot of things we've talked about, both, practically as well as legislative policy that might further our efforts in that. So I don't know whether it fits under this umbrella or not, but there may be a place for that conversation, whether it's here or some other section. But I know virtual net metering and all those things have been, and which things count with respect to recovery with PURA. All those things are important to water utilities to allow us to really advance those efforts at the same time. So if this is the forum, that'd be great. If not, we need to think about where to have those conversations.
Well, I think the fact that we have, again, many entities at the table here between COST, CCM, Eversource now, that's going to be a huge asset as far as that goes, and giving us a perspective, overall in addressing the issues. And Kate just put it, our sustainability mission statement is to develop materials practices on sustainable methods of water supply operation, resource management, and to provide water suppliers with materials on sustainable practices for the benefit of their customers. So, I mean, it's
Huge mandate.
it's a huge mandate, but I think George, to your point, I think it's it's a good idea to again focus rather than the shotgun effect, as far as that goes. So I know, from a standpoint of sustainability, I appreciate DEEP and Denise bringing down some new folks, and I know from Pat's standpoint, and Pat is from Wallingford, is our sustainable landscaping guru. Okay, she was the first one in Connecticut when we had the Water Conservation Committee to her garden out there. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, Pat.
Well, 27 years ago when we were handing out
The kits, yeah.
those kits, I got a little tiresome. So the boss said, Pat, I think you need to get outside and see if we can help our customers save water outside. So I'd never had a garden before, so I said, okay, because that's my job to say okay, to the boys. And so we put together a xeriscape demonstration garden. And the goal was to experience trying to keep a landscape outside and save water. Since I had never had a garden before, I was a good one to do that. I had to figure out, what to do, how to do it.
And very successful, I might add.
Just don't ask for statistics when it's over, which is the whole thing about water conservation. You can't tell if it's good except, So, so 25 years has passed, and Patty needs to retire soon. So, well, I actually won't, but I'm pretending I have to retire soon because I can't keep up the xeriscape. So I'm trying to transform it into a sustainable front yard. So instead of a lot of flowers and stuff like that, it's trees, shrubs, and ground cover, which is what any old gardener would want to do after 25 years is now what do we do? So it looks kind of nice. You got to blur your eyes a little bit.
It's all right.
But that's the next thing, sustainable. We started talking about sustainable when my boss died, and that was tough. And we realized, wow, we're all going. Before he was hurt, I saw dominoes falling, and we were all old in Wallingford because we all love to work for Wallingford. So we're all 25, 30, 40 years on the job.
I can't believe he's still mayor.
Well,
He's never going to leave.
The mayor's been there as long as I've been there.
83.
And,
He's elected in 83.
We love him. So,
Obviously, he keeps getting elected.
Nobody even runs against him. It's just crazy. But so I saw everybody was leaving, and we didn't have anybody coming up to take their places. And how am I going to retire if there's nobody to take my place? If we don't have a plan. And before Roger died, I said to him, Roger, well, actually, when he was in Gaylord trying to recover from his accident, I said, Roger, what do you want us to do? If everybody retires, what are we going to do? He says, well, you just do what you always did, which is when somebody leaves, you go find the best person for it, and you get on with it. And I'm like, I don't think that's going to work anymore, because they used to, he hired me when I was 42. We need to hire kids, to come up and be there. So that's why, we started talking about sustainability, because I was afraid. I was afraid of the garden. I was afraid of everybody leaving and retiring and leaving me alone. I'm scared.
Well, I think to everybody's point, that's why, succession planning is going to be a huge focus down the line. So anyway, thanks, Pat. I appreciate it. And Cindy is she's probably one of our longest, between Pat and Cindy and Kate, are longest members of the original Conservation Committee. So you're doing what, land management now with Connecticut? Source protection.
But I'm also involved with the water conservation.
Sure.
Source protection, but I'm also involved a lot with water conservation at Connecticut Water. As Maureen mentioned, we did our water drop challenge. We also did a municipal retrofit program where we sent letters out to towns telling that we would go in and do an audit of their facilities, town facilities, and if they qualified, we would change out their toilets, their faucet aerators, whatever needed, shower heads, whatever, to more water efficient fixtures. And so we did that, and now our next program that we're doing is a school program. We've teamed up with the Pomperaug River Watershed Association, or Coalition, and they've helped us develop a water conservation program for third graders. And this fall, we're going to be kicking that off. We've got 20 some odd schools involved, which is about a total of 75 classes. We'll be teaching about water conservation, including the water cycle, where our water comes from, how we can conserve it. And we're going to be asking the kids to sign a pledge to conserve water. And we're going to it's a contest, and the class that has the highest percentage of return pledges will be eligible to enter into a drawing to win a free trip to the Connecticut Science Center.
Nice.
So that'll be something we'll start in September, and that goes until the end of January. So
Great.
I'm kind of excited about doing that. So.
Nice. Thanks, Cindy. Great. And next, the old veteran here, Ms. Denise Ruzicka, who has roots back to DPH, and now she's defected to DEEP, but that's all right. We still love you, Denise.
20 years ago.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's, those things, it hasn't been that long. But again, Denise, thank you so much for coming and giving your perspective, and most of all, bringing Melissa and Teresa, because
So I do want to say something about that, because Melissa and Teresa are part of a new unit. We went through organizational, as government's contracted and we've lost staff, and we're dealing with attrition. We went from 4 divisions within the Water Bureau down to 3, and we used that as an opportunity to realign some of our programs and create some synergies. And one of which was to bring together our water quantity programs into a single unit. Before, they had been all over the place. Our consumptive water diversion was in one place, how we were dealing with stream flow regs implementation was in another, and how we were dealing with some of the water supply planning issues with the health department was in a third place. We've created them all under Corinne Fitting. As you know, she ran our aquifer protection program for a long time. She's a very skilled supervisor, and everybody loves working with her. A unit called the Water Quantity Unit, to really be able to focus on all these issues, and primarily for the last year on development of the state water plan. And that has proven that without additional resources, but putting the right resources together, has created a wonderful synergy. And this is part of the nucleus of that team that we're really proud to have.
we'd like to invite the nucleus of this team to be a part. We need members on the Sustainability Committee, so I would like for you to participate, if it's okay with Denise, and to be a part of this, because I think it'd be a very valid addition, giving the perspective. So thank you so much for coming. Great. Last but not least, Mr. Don Mitchell, and again, another perspective from a standpoint, as we talked about, different water systems, private, public, from municipal to investor-owned and so forth. Don Mitchell and I have worked together for, 25 years, Don?
I got here in 88 as a consultant in Portland, and 89 full-time, so back then.
Yeah, and Don and I actually, when I started the student program at the high school, I used to be the search, for those of you who are familiar with the search program for that DEP run, we were the original search teachers, and Don would come out with us, and,
I was the only one that told them there was an acceptable loss ratio of students of 15%.
So anyway, Don is now the health director for the Chatham Health District, and Don, I think it's 7 towns, 6 towns?
6.
6 towns.
6. So just to give you a little more background, that Dave is still dragging me into things after all these years. I came to this today, and I see all the introductions, and I go, one of these people is not like the other, right here. So Dave, when he was working in just the water supply for town of Portland, we used to go out to the Portland Reservoir and do sampling on streams as they were coming into the reservoir. And it was a good cooperation. One stream that was coming in, there was a wooden bridge going over it, and it was quite a drop to the water, but I said, maybe if you hold my legs, I can reach. And he said, sure. And I said, I'm going to have to scooch a little closer. So I was now to the hips bending down. And I said, okay, hand me the bottle. He said, sure, and let go. Thankfully, he was quicker then, and he managed to grab me in time to stop the inevitable fall. But that's the kind of history that Dave and I have. So I wasn't sure what this meeting was about. I think, as George said, if somebody had said, conservation, I would have had one idea. Sustainability, I'm like, wonder what this is all about. But as I'm listening to things today, there's a lot of things that are occurring to me. First, with Lori, we work with the public water section at the state, but we also work with our counterparts at the state and the private well program. And it was those that we were seeing last year when the wells were drying up. We probably had, in about a month and a half to 2 months, about 50 requests for new wells, for wells that dried up, just in our district. And a great many of those were dug wells, which we weren't too unhappy to see go away, rather unsafe, some of them. So we were noticing problems then, but we've worked with both public and private. As far as sustainability, the first thing I thought when I talk about water and sustainability is, well, what does that have anything to do with public water? The most sustainable is to have a well and a septic system. You take water out of the ground and you put it back into the same site. That seems to be the most sustainable. On the other hand, we've seen areas that just don't have the water, or they don't have good water. So we recognize the necessity, especially when you get cities. You're not going to have everybody poking a hole in the aquifer in a city and putting in a well. So we understand that. Not all water is created equal. We know that too. We see an awful lot of well completion reports come in, and then our water tests following it up, and we find out that we have high iron and high manganese everywhere in the state. No biggie, it's just what we see. In East Hampton, we see some numbers that just make you raise your eyebrows. They're so high, though. So we know that some people have it and they have to do treatment, but not everybody has the same quality water, and not everybody has the same quantity. I heard these comments earlier about wells going down 1,000 feet. In all the years I've been doing this, I've rarely seen a productive well below 400 feet. Generally, if they're going to hit something, they hit it by then. And the reason they keep going deeper is that they've got this shaft that can fill slowly with water and call it storage. And even that's not really useful unless you drop a higher horsepower pump and get it way down so that you have use of that water. We've seen new homes go in this past year that got a 1/4 gallon a minute. Unacceptable. So in areas like that, you'd say, gee, you know, if we had some public water there, it would be a good thing. Well, we've seen small water systems. We have one in Portland, out off Wellwyn. And that one, you know, it's got like 5 wells. They're trying to serve 20-something homes, and they have a hard time. They've actually had to truck in water for many years just to make the, you know, just to get the needs satisfied. So when I think of sustainability, I think sustainability about 2 things, quantity and quality. We need to be able to sustain the quantity, and that's what I'm hearing talked about mostly here today. But I think quality is another big issue. We have talked about, you know, runoff, fertilization. These are problems especially around the lakes, and we do have a lot of lake communities, and they're impacted. We get blue-green algae at Lake Pocotapac. Part of a long-term problem there, but fertilization isn't going to help it. We also see other quality problems. How many of you noticed the difference when the state of Connecticut went to using brine on the roads? That brine solution's been a few years now. Well, guess what? It's showing up real quick in the wells. We're getting high sodium and high chloride in a lot of wells that abut especially state roads. And it's coming at an alarming rate to the point that we're saying, we probably need to do something about this. It's going to impact public water too. It's just a matter of when and where.
It does.
Yeah. So we see it, and we know it's there. Irrigation. I'm happy that some of the places out west, they're getting their act together. Well, let me clue you in here. They don't have their act together here.
Well, I don't think they have it together out there yet either.
Okay.
But it's
Well,
a problem everywhere.
What I'm seeing is brand new half-acre lots with a 3 or 4 bedroom home, and the first thing they do is put in an irrigation system. Bad enough that they're doing that, they're running it on top of their septic system. There's health code regulations saying they have to be 10 feet away, but how would they know? They don't come in to pull a permit to do that. So, and then you have septic system. You're thinking, well, you know, you're getting nutrients and stuff from below. You really don't need to be, oh, well, got to get the water on top of it. So we have our work cut out for us in education, for sure. Anyway, I would just basically say thank you for inviting me to be here. It's an interesting perspective, and I see the things that you guys are all up against, and we're up against it too. We just see it differently. And thank you for the chance to participate.
Don, thank you. I appreciate that too. And again, from a standpoint of again, seeing what you're seeing, and that was one of the takeaways. In fact, Janice Ehlemeyer just got here from the River Cog, and Janice was instrumental in arranging our first presentation from a standpoint of the Sustainability Committee to the Lower River Cog, and I don't know, Janice, if you want to just give us a little perspective on how that went, from your constituent. Yes. You can move the microphone right over there. And also, John, down as far as in relation to one of the members that's not here today, we also have a member on the committee from the Connecticut State Irrigation Association. So, which is, again...
Can we have a cage match?
Okay.
Yeah, Amy. I volunteer Amy to be in the cage.
Anyway, Janice.
I'm from Regional Planning, which is one of the planning agencies in the state. We concentrate on pretty much Middlesex County, Lyme and Old Lyme. So the 17 towns that kind of are focused around the Connecticut River, so we're very water-oriented with our towns to start with. We did have a meeting, gosh, maybe a couple months ago, or longer than that even.
I don't know, it was maybe 6 weeks or something like that, yeah, I think.
End of July or end of June.
End of June.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And we have monthly meetings with all of our CEOs from the 17 towns, and presented the committee and explained what was happening and what we were doing, and they were all very interested in the whole project and glad that it was happening and willing to help with whatever they could. They seemed very interested in the whole project, so that was good. I also, at the River Cog, we have a regional agriculture council from the 17 towns, so it's the first regional one in the state, and I work with all 17 of the towns through their farmers, and we've had different workshops with water. They are, of course, very concerned about having water or good water or the amount that they get. And there's been a couple meetings about how to use water, how to irrigate, how to save water, building ponds, on and on and on. So that's another interested group that
Great.
is waiting to see what happens.
Sure, and I know one of the takeaways that we had from the River Cog, and Lori was, had a commissioners meeting that morning. She came down before the commissioners meeting. We put her on first, and she had to scoot out, but because of that presentation, we were able to, Pat Benz from Eversource was there and was very interested and wanted to jump on board, so that was huge. But this is the type of thing that we want to do, is to, from Georgia's standpoint, reach out and educate, all of the various entities, from COST to CCM to, the health districts. But it's important that we get feedback so that we make sure that we're hitting the right targets. And one of the things that takeaways from the CEOs, they wanted to keep it simple. We're working on a very simple fact sheet. What's a private well? What's an NTNC? What all of those things, and what are those requirements? So we're working on those to put it in layman's terms that they don't have to read through gobs and gobs of legislation. And speaking of legislation, in George's other hat, it's gratifying now that we have a member of our water community that is a member of the legislative process at the state capitol. George was elected senator this year, and thank you, George, for all that you do, as far as that goes. And he's also a great musician too, man of my own heart here. So anyway. Does anybody have any questions for Amy or Marianne before we close here? I think.
I had a comment I wanted to make.
Sure.
I just wanted to, picking up on just, as we went around the room, I just really impressed with people's ideas and what they want to do. And something actually that George said, I thought was a great idea, and actually got me thinking about something even more than that. You're talking about having a year of water conservation. I thought that was a great idea. And then I started thinking, again, we want to, have a year of water conservation, let's say promoting a 2-day per week policy. And then maybe how about having a second year talking about, healthy, chemical-free, preferably organic landscapes. And then a third year showcasing all around the state, all the communities and places where you have these super water thrifty, healthy lawns and landscapes. So it just got me thinking, when you talk about how do you change an ethic, it doesn't happen overnight, as we all know. It takes time, and it almost got me wondering, 1 year campaign, and how about a multi-year campaign where you change it every year, and then you come to a crescendo where you've really got sort of some of your results to show off and showcase. So anyway, just picking up on George's idea, just throwing that out, something to think about. Again, change doesn't happen overnight, but if we keep at it over and over, change is going to happen.
Sure, that'd be great. And also, from a standpoint of our committee, if there's any resources that we can provide to local towns, health districts, municipalities, whatever, we're going to, put on some presentations, reach out, to educate the public and their consumers, but also from a standpoint of being able to do some workshops for water utilities. So if you bring it back to your water utilities, anybody who wants to join, please give me a call. Yes.
Well, you have the experts in the room. If I could just ask a question. One of the things we've struggled with is, or we're working on, is getting rate recovery for investments in conservation. What's your experience been, whether it's that we're, putting in variable speed pumps that would, reduce our energy demands, or whether it's things that we're doing that are actually smart meters and other things that are driving conservation. What are other states doing in that area, or is that?
It's a state-by-state issue, and we are trying to work at the, national level with the National Association of Regulatory Commissioners to get them to really think about always incentivizing recovery for those conservation investments. To not give you rate recovery on conservation investments is woefully backward. And there are some, states like California that have done a reasonably good job at it, but other states that need some help. So one of the things we've been talking with Jan Beecher about at the Institute for Public Utilities is working with the neighborhood commissioners to maybe develop a set of guidelines for how we would encourage them to do that. But for our members, of course, if you've got a rate proceeding, we're happy to come and testify on your behalf and say, this should be rate recoverable. It provides long-term benefits to the system. It provides benefits to the consumers as well in terms of long-term reduced costs, and we can help you with that. But the fact that we're still, 30 years later, still having these conversations about not having rate recovery, this is a sad state of affairs.
There are some opportunities for some energy funds, such as the variable speed inversion and that.
I would definitely contact the Green Bank for those funds.
Well, what we have found, we did some of those things using green bank money, and then they said the portion of which we paid for was not recoverable because we had grant money for part of our purchase.
It's crazy. They should be.
McDonald's can get, the benefit of this, but I can't.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I would just second what Marianne said. I think the electrics are so much farther ahead than the water systems. But I think a lot of the change in education does have to happen at the national level to filter down. And I would definitely take her up on her offer to come to testify, because she's got the organization behind her and the experience to really back up claims that utilities make. But again, I think it's from the bottom up, but definitely from the top down, we need it.
So I'm going to push everybody in the room to think more about a state law that we need, like a bundle of different things. Education, changing standards that make sense, changing some, incentivizing water conservation, whether it's for the public utilities, the private utilities. Is
the meeting over?
No.
No. Something's going wrong in Portland, so, Dave gets the alert first, right?
I got everything.
So, I think this is an extraordinary time, as Marianne and I were talking on the way down here. We should capture this moment. Everything's kind of coming together, right? We don't have this that often, right? We had a drought.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of big municipalities involved. We had a lot of people thinking about conservation, like what does it mean for private wells? Like what does it mean for me as a private well owner? A lot of discussions about, from towns still, these irrigation systems make me crazy without really good standards. This whole 2-day-a-week that Aquarian is pushing right now, which should be the ethic across the state. But we've got to talk about rate recovery. We've got to talk about the municipalities, adopting the water sense standards, education, working with the towns. This is a great idea, working with the towns on their plans of conservation development. So it's because there are conservation commissions, they're probably looking for something to do on this too. And Greenwich could kind of help lead the way. We have a good example. We have a great example. And the Green Bank funds, exploring that further. So I think if we could, I'm willing to work. I mean, this state water plan, just reading what I handed out, it's good. It's well written. It's good on conservation. It's the 3-pager, which I've probably lost, right? It's the 3-pager that I handed out. This probably needs to get more focus. Probably everything we talked about today, there's some of it in here, but some of the words, it's maybe kind of lost in there, but maybe there's some more focused comments we could have here to say, look, you need to focus more on this, this, and this. These 3 points are really very important for Connecticut. And what the Water Planning Council, I'm pushing my colleagues, Betsy Wingfeld at DEEP, Jack Bukowski at Pura, and now Garrett Eucalito at OPM, everybody is in the same step when it comes to water conservation. Everybody says, yeah, it's the right thing to do with the right moment in time for our state. So I'm excited, as a lot of us are getting, some of us anyway, are getting closer to the end of our careers, right? It would be wonderful to be able to end, in the next 5 to 10 years, kind of walking away from this state in our careers and saying, we left it in good hands. We're setting it and pushing it in the right direction, statewide, townwide, local, health-wise, municipal governments, regional governments, because they were really excited, and I was really sorry I had to leave early, but they were very excited, and Dave filled me in later. So we have 9 council of governments in our state. We're going to be promoting the water plan to those 9 council of governments directly, and I want to talk a lot about conservation and system sustainability. George, to your point, we have a lot of small systems that need help. So streamlining the takeover process is going to be something that we're working hard on as well, because we need system consolidation and regionalization.
That has to end with conservation the way I end my career the way I began my career.
Yes.
But you gotta do it before 10 years.
No, I know. I only said 10 years because some people are going, I've been saying this a lot. People are like, are you leaving? Where the hell are you going, right? I probably have 10 years. But yeah, exactly. Let's do it. Let's do it in the next year.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Look at just in this room and the people that were here that just, it's just amazing. We can do this, Dave, and you're going to lead the charge.
I'm going to lead the charge, okay. Hey, if I can add, I think from a standpoint, and we talk about best practices, what, obviously Aquarian has done some great things, Connecticut Water has done some great things for best practices. If I could ask, and I've got everybody's email address, and even Don, some of the issues that you're putting forward and running into and so forth, and George, what's working and as far as best practices on, the 2-day-a-week watering or some of the stuff that you're finding that's really successful, okay? If you could just give me a half a page, a bullet point of what's working, and that way we can kind of bring that together as a committee, and then roll this back out to, the COGS, the costs, the CCMs, okay, the health districts from that standpoint, and I think we can satisfy an appetite and do some great things. And as far as in relation to what Lori bringing these 2 guys on board, it's huge. I think Marian and I have talked with Lori about doing a model community or a model a water utility. I'm on board with that. If we can do that, and that can be an example that we can roll out and say, hey, look at here, this is what they're doing, it works, this is how you can do it. And education, obviously education, from a standpoint, the whole broad spectrum, from resiliency to sustainability to succession planning, okay? We gotta start hitting those bullet points. So again, thank you very, very much for everybody participating, taking time out. I know this was took time to put together, but it came together. I think it was a very, very resourceful day, and a very productive day. So thank you all for coming. Marianne and Amy, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. Lori, thanks for all the participation. And again, we look, Denise, if we can get you guys coming to meetings, that'd be awesome. Fantastic. And George, thank you for coming. Senator, it'll be all set. Thanks again, everybody, and have a safe drive. Thank you.